like to call this special board meeting to session. It is now 3:06 and it's May 12th. And I would like to ask everybody to please rise and we will do the flag salute, please. And I will bring out my little flag for everybody to see. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, I'm recording this meeting.
I was going to ask you that very question. Are you ready to record?
I just started.
Okay, thank you. I would need an motion for the approval of the agenda.
I don't remember getting an agenda.
Yeah, we did. Pam attached one. So I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Stern, Dr. Stern. Okay, Noah first, Dr. Stern second. And approval, please. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to the board business, which was the topic for today. And I'll call on you, Dr. Briggy, to maybe kick it off and turn it over to our specialist.
So I'll immediately turn it over to Deb Dudley, who has reached out to all of us. And this is the like a follow-up to our first meeting since the last creation of the governance handbook with our two, who I don't consider really new anymore, but with Mary and Mandy. And so, and if I know that you've had some telephone calls, but this is a visual way of introducing Deb to both Mary and Mandy.
Thank you, Dr. Breggy. And please, let's keep this informal today. You guys can call me Deb. I hope I can call you by your first names. Mary and Mandy, really nice to meet you and put a face to a voice. And thank all of you for taking the time you spent with me on the phone. I know we've all had extensive conversations and really open, honest conversations to help facilitate today's workshop. Before I start to share my screen, I want to tell you the reason for review of the governance handbook and why it's important. It's important because Mandy and Mary, you guys got elected and inherited a lot of things, as you are finding out, that happened before you and that came before you were ever elected. There are new board members come to the realization pretty quickly that there are a lot of wheels in motion prior to them being elected. This is one of the wheels that you have some control over, which is your governance handbook, your norms, your protocols, your ways of doing things, board bylaws, etc. Because they weren't inherited by you and developed by your previous board, it's really, really important that not only I explain to you what the protocols mean and why they were developed, but your fellow board members can give you some perspective on why they wrote the protocols the way that they wrote them. I helped facilitate writing the governance handbook, but the actual wordsmithing was done by the former board. And so it's important that you understand why they are in place, and more importantly, that you're able to give input into them. So for instance, if there's a protocol that you disagree with or you don't feel is a way that things are actually happening, or a protocol that you feel could use some refinement or might not be comfortable for you, it's really important that we reach out to you to give input, because this is the board's rules of the road, if you will. This is the board's guidelines for the way that you do things and why you do things the way that you do things. And so really, really important that you don't just inherit this, you have the opportunity to participate in the creation, or in this case, the modification of the handbook. So with that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen with your permission. And we're going to walk through. Nope, that's not what I want. I want the view to be sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty at the moment. Let me share.
Did you want to expand it, Deb?
I'm just trying to get to it at the moment. New share.
We actually did see it.
I know it was the wrong
Oh.
wrong format. So let's see if I can share it. Nope. Okay, view is view. Here we go. And we want the slideshow view.
Okay, what did you find out?
You can also go under slideshow. Yeah.
Nope.
I think you go under slideshow.
I'm trying to get there. No, it's not. It's not.
Oh, your
doing-
mouse is messed up?
Yeah, no, it's under view. Slideshow's not showing up for some reason.
No, slideshow has its own tab on the drop down. Up
Yeah.
there.
I'm
Two
trying-
to the left of view.
Ah, there we go. Ta-da. Thank you, Noah. Okay, new computer, trying to navigate. Okay, so this is what we're doing today. These are our meeting guidelines, guys, and I'd like to see you all agree to these if you don't mind. I think we're not going to have a problem with this group participating. You're all very good participants. And when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see all of you at once. I mean, I can very smallly. So if you want to say something, please feel free to just unmute yourself and chime in. This is a very participatory day. So don't worry about raising your hand. There's only a few of us here. So please just chime in. A really important part of our meeting guidelines is actively listening and realizing that all opinions matter. So only one person talking at a time, please, so I can hear what you have to say. Again, I don't think I'm going to have any problem with this group being open and honest, but we're going to identify some challenges today, and I'd like us to focus on the solutions for those challenges and assign responsibility for those solutions. I think that's the most important part of identifying challenges, not to just throw them out there, but figure out how we're going to fix them and how we can do the best work that we can possibly do on behalf of our children and people of our district. So for Mary and Mandy, you probably are figuring this out already. There are some realities of school board governance that maybe you didn't think about when you ran for the office. And so I'd just like to talk about them for a minute. You campaign as an individual, but you serve as a member of a team. So that's a really important, it's a really important part. And I have to say that that was probably one of the biggest shocks for me was the limits of board member authority. And so I didn't tell you a little bit about me because the others know about me, but I was a 14-year school board member in 2 different districts in Northern California. And I work with districts all over the state on behalf of California School Boards Association, as I have for the last 7 years. Doing this kind of work, I've trained over 200 districts now. And this is what I hear from all new board members across the state. We really thought we had, as an individual board member and as an elected official, I thought I had the power to change things. And then I found out that it was really the power of the board that could make changes, not me as an individual. Although I could contribute and I could identify and suggest things that needed to be changed, I as an individual really had no power to change anything or to fix anything. So that means in order to get a majority vote to fix things, you have to come together as a team. You have to learn to work together as a team and put whatever differences you may have aside and come together on behalf of children. Now, I want to say, having watched a few of your board meetings and during COVID, because I check up on you every once in a while when you don't think I'm looking, and I can say that a lot of your board meetings and looking at your minutes, you guys really did that during a really hard crisis situation. You really came together as a team. And when it came down to votes about kids and things that were important and delegating a lot of responsibility to Dr. Breggy and his staff, you were very trusting. You came together as a team, a lot of 5-0 votes, which were great. You really were cohesive in your mindset about what was important for children. So I applaud you on that. That's great. On the other hand, you know, sometimes you don't come together as a team, and there's obvious differences in your thought processes and some of the things that you as individuals want to accomplish, and your communication styles. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. Your success as a board member, and I can't stress this enough, is really tied to the success of the board. I always say there are no successful board members on unsuccessful boards. And the thing that breaks my heart the most is when I see a board member struggling to become part of a team, and I often, don't get there until it's a couple of years in when they finally call us for some CSBA help. And I see board members who are so frustrated because they came on board with the best of intentions and then couldn't find their way as part of the team to get anything done. And they're halfway through their tenure, and all the things that they wanted to get done, they haven't been able to move forward because of, for whatever reasons, and there's a million reasons why people don't sometimes fit into a part of a team, or sometimes teams don't let them in. There's sometimes closed ranks around new board members. I don't feel that that's happening here. I think everything that's going on within your district and within your team is you're all really smart, well-meaning, intelligent, caring people who are leading with your hearts. And so I think your challenges are small and can easily be overcome. I want you to recognize that one of the biggest realities of being a school board member is that you have to be mindful all the time. You have to be mindful of what the public perception is of the words that you say, of your body language, of your actions. You have to be prepared, which it takes a lot more preparation than most people are expecting when they get elected to the position. And you have to be mindful and focused on the tasks at hand. And remember that when you're in a board meeting, it's not a public meeting. It's a business meeting of the board that's done in public. And that's a real different mindset to think about. You're there to do the business of the district and to make sure that the things that need to be voted on and the things that need to be moved forward are top of mind, and that children are top of mind. And I like to say that what we talk about is what gets done. So make sure during your board meetings and when you're putting together your agendas that children are always top of mind. And then finally recognize that governing and being part of a team is a human experience. It requires a lot of patience, understanding, courage, kindness, and patience again. So it's in there twice on purpose. Here are some of the objectives. Thank you again for your talking to me on the phone. Here are some of the objectives that some of you, or most of you, articulated. I would say there was a lot of commonality and common threads in the conversations that I had with you all. And so these are the things that sort of came out in our conversations. If there's anything I missed or I got wrong, please speak up and let me know if these are the things that you want to discuss today, or if there's anything I missed, because these are the things that I'm going to focus on during our couple of hours together. I want to not only focus on what we're doing right, but focus on where we struggle. So I'd like you guys to be honest with me about where you're having trouble, where you're feeling frustrations, and how you're feeling you as individuals and as a group are struggling. I see a lot of conversations. So the one criticism I have of the last couple board meetings that I watched is that there seemed to be a lot of conversations and a lot of focus on adult needs and not a lot of focus and conversation on the needs of your children. And so it seemed to be taking up an inordinate amount of your time. And so to keep you in a good governance mindset and to keep you guys moving forward and to be doing the work that you need to be doing right now on behalf of your children, think about your agendas and the length of your conversations and ask yourself, are 80 to 90% of our conversations and our meetings focused on the needs of children? Or are we taking up the majority of our time and energy focusing on adult concerns? Okay, and specifically, you guys know what I'm talking about, specifically some of the conversations around committees, et cetera. Took up way too much time and way too much of your energy and emotion. And then I want to talk about where governance begins and where it ends, and talk about how governance plays a part of everything you do in your everyday life, including your use of social media, the conversations you have with friends and colleagues, the conversations you have in the community, and why it's important to stay in a good governance mindset on behalf of the team and the work that you do in everything that you do. Certainly, we're going to review your governance handbook, your norms and protocols. And if you didn't get my homework or did do your homework, the homework that I asked you all to do, if you recall from our conversations, was I didn't think we could make it through all of your protocols today, but I wanted each of you to identify at least one possibly 2 protocols that you thought needed discussion today. I have a few on my list, so if you didn't get to it, that's okay. I probably have enough to take up our time. And I want to focus on, I think there's a lot of confusion around, as an individual board member, what do you do when you don't understand the why we're doing it this way, or the how we're doing something? So what's a good collaborative way to get the answers to the why are we doing this, or the how are we going to make this happen? Because I think there's a lot of you do it in a lot of different ways, and I think we need to have some cohesion about how you get answers to your why and your how questions. So speak up if there's anything I missed or anything I misconstrued. Go ahead, Tristan.
I don't think there's anything you missed or misconstrued. I just would like to make sure there's a fine point on the differentiation between what is staff role versus board role.
Yeah, I'd like to re-examine a couple things, and you'll see it as we go through. The last time I was with you all, and Mary and Mandy were not there, but I think it's important that we revisit the who does what part when we talked about what the superintendent needs from the board and what the board needs from the superintendent, and sort of where those points of delineation are in terms of their role. So we're going to revisit that. And also we're going to revisit the document that staff gave you at our last session that's incorporated in your governance handbook that talks about their expectations of how they work with you. And so I think those 2 things are important for everybody to go through and have a reminder. Anything else? Okay, then we will move ahead. We'll forge ahead. So things I've observed from reviewing your minutes and watching your meetings online, and I apologize for being brutally honest. So you have to give me a little forgiveness up front. So the good thing is, like I said earlier, when it comes to kids, you're all on the same page. That's great. Sometimes it gets personal, and that's not good for business. It's not good for the business of the board. It's not good for the business of having community confidence, the community being confident in the work that you do. And so we need to talk about how we don't let that happen again, or how we can come up with some methodologies for getting our questions answered, and maybe having tough conversations if we need to, one-to-one, instead of during a public meeting. So we're going to talk about that. And then I want to talk about how staff feels. I can tell you that at your last meeting that I watched, not last night's, but the one before that, the staff, looking at the staff's faces, they looked shell-shocked. And it looked like they felt like they were sort of in the middle. Dr. Breggy, did I get that right? Were you a little shell-shocked? Did the staff feel a little bit torn when there's conflict on the board?
So yeah, I mean, I knew that there was an issue. So, but I really try not to involve a lot of the cabinet with some of the issues that, some of the mediating that we're doing. I try, you know what I mean? I try not to take some of that and share like that with them. So they were very shocked, and they said, could you warn us next time? And I mean, I just try not to involve them. So that's what you saw was real, because I knew that it was going to go there, but I didn't share any. I tried to not involve them.
Are you
Great.
talking about April 8th?
I don't remember exactly the date, Tristan. It was the last 2, one of the meetings where there was conflict, and with the last couple that you
Yeah,
had.
I think April 8th.
Yeah. Anyway, think about, and I use this analogy, think about how a child feels when their parents are fighting. They feel really vulnerable, and sometimes kids feel like it's their fault. And I think staffs are not much different than that. They feel when the people that they trust and that they're working for and that they're really trying to impress and really trying to do their best work for are uncomfortable, or seem uncomfortable with their suggestions or their recommendations, or just aren't getting along, I think they feel a little vulnerable, and they feel like, wow, is my job in jeopardy? Is the district in jeopardy? Is our superintendent going to leave because he doesn't feel good about this? So it's really, really important that the staff have confidence in you and the work that you're doing, confidence in the people that you are, confidence in the leaders that you are, and confidence that you appreciate the job that they're doing, and that you stand behind them, and that you stand behind each other. And that, remember, you're all a team. All of you board members, Dr. Breggy and your executive staff and all of your teachers, you're all on the same side. You're all there to do great things for kids in your district. And so think about yourself that way and think about how everything makes everyone feel. So at CSBA, we have 4 pillars that we call the 4 pillars of effective governance. And these pillars are the foundation for the good work of boards, for boards doing their best work. Boards, we have a unity of purpose. I don't think you guys have the slightest problem with your unity of purpose. I think you all have your goals at top of mind, and the goals are, the health and safety of the kids in your district and having a good environment for learning. So I think you all have a strong unity of purpose. When we did goal setting last time I was there didn't seem to be any real conflicts with your unity of purpose. I think you're struggling right now a little bit with your roles and responsibilities, and hopefully we'll work through that a little bit today. I think you want to have a positive team culture and have good norms to follow. And it's all based on understanding your protocols and all agreeing to play by the same rule book. So I think we're going to make some progress today on stabilizing the foundation of your 4 pillars. Really, really important to remember that you're elected as citizen oversight. That means really a lot of different things to different people. But what you're there to do is make sure that all the children of your district have an equitable education, so that what's offered to one student is also offered to the next student, that you put your emphasis on all the children of your district and they're all treated equally and equitably in the eyes of the district. This is your bylaw 9200, and this is based in law. And this speaks about the limits of board member authority. So I would say to new board members, if you don't want to read all your bylaws because they're really boring and they'll put you to sleep and there's a million of them, read the 9000 series. The 9000 series, in particular 9200 series, really addresses the role of the board. What does the board do? What are the limits of board member authority? What kinds of things can we do? And so no individual authority doesn't mean you don't have input. But it does mean that you can't direct staff. It does mean that as an individual board member, there are limits on what you can ask for and what you can't ask for without board approval. And so we're going to talk about what that says in your protocols, because your protocols outline that pretty carefully. And we'll talk about where limits of board member authority begin and where they end. So I want you guys, if you haven't seen this before, it's in your handbook, but I think it's really important that you take a look at this list. And this was from the 2 times that we worked together in the past, in 19 and in 2020, which seems like a million years ago now. But this was the list that the board and the superintendent articulated were important things, what the board needs from the superintendent. And so, especially new board members, is there anything that's not on this list that you think should be added to this list of things that you need from the superintendent? Or anything on that list that you needs clarification for you? How about former board members or current board members? Tristan?
I would add to the what the superintendent needs from the board, the bullet point that says no staff to board direct contact without his knowledge.
Yeah.
I would add in or board to staff.
Say that again. I want to understand that.
No, it says no staff to board direct contact without his knowledge. I would add in or board to staff.
Okay, so 2-way.
Yep.
Okay, and that's delineated in one of our protocols, so good. And what's the reason for that, Tristan? Do you want to explain why why that was important and why we put that in our protocols? Why board members shouldn't go directly to staff without Dr. Breggy knowing or being aware?
Because it creates an environment where staff appears to be working, that could be furthering the project or task of one board member instead of the board as a whole. And we need to be able to direct staff together, not individually. So what we had talked about in that session was that if we have questions, not questions that we ask necessarily in an open meeting, just informational questions, that even if we're reaching out to staff, that we do so with Dr. Breggy in the loop, so that he's copied on the email or anything else like that, or to ask his permission first and say, I have some questions about this. Can I reach out to so-and-so staff member? And then to keep him on the communication so that conversations aren't happening that he's not aware of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
and you also don't undermine his authority. That's
Completely.
since he's truly in charge of the district, and he's truly has to be in charge of the district. By going around him on anything, you undermine his authority.
I think
And
you
it
also
goes-
have to include on that using the legal system, using the legal experts, and using lawyers, going to them without his knowledge also. And like that should be in there without any doubt.
Yeah, well, any staff member, maybe we want to add that to the protocol.
Yeah,
Michelle.
is that not in the protocol?
I don't
I don't believe so.
We're going to get to it. So
Okay.
we'll see if we should add that. So the protocol to add, not going to legal staff. Well, there's another reason why you don't want to do that too. You don't want individual board
Incur
members.
expenses.
Yeah, using up a lot of legal staff time.
No, the protocol is to send questions to Dr. Breggy. If there can't be,
And,
they have
and
to go
I,
to council, then he has to.
I also, this is just a good place just to plug into just something really positive that, you know, I feel like, because I'm never like in this office, like we're a small district, as you know. And so, you know, what I used to do in another district, you know, you do everything here. So, you know, it's like, I'm often not sitting in my office waiting for an email to come in. So, but it's really nice though, that people are maybe asking somebody on the cabinet a question and then I'm just CC'd on it, so that then later I'm filled in on that. So, I think that the board does a really good job of keeping me in the loop. I can't remember even a time where I was blindsided.
Great, that's good to hear. There's another reason that I want to articulate about why this is an important protocol. It's really important that you all come to the dais with the same pieces of information. And let's say, for instance, Noah were to meet with the director of facilities and had a whole, you know, hour with them talking about how facilities were working and how things were working, and got a piece of information that wasn't, that the rest of the board wasn't privy to. And that's why it's really, really important that questions about things that you're voting on go through Dr. Breggy, so Dr. Breggy can keep track of those things and make sure that if Noah's question is answered, that the rest of you know what question was asked and what question was answered. And so you all come to the dais with the same pieces of information. And so that's why it's important that all communication that's direct with staff be allowed to go through Dr. Breggy or his executive assistant, so that they can keep track of them and they can make sure that all of you are on the same page with regard to information. Okay, what the superintendent needs from the board. Dr. Breggy, did we forget anything, or is there anything that you think needs to be in the last year added to this list?
You know, I reviewed it last night again, and I think it's pretty, I think it's pretty right on where it should be.
Good. So you know, Mary and Mandy, the one thing that I added to both of these lists was the bullet point presumption of best intentions, because I think it's really important that all board members presume that when the superintendent or staff come to them with a recommendation, it's with the best intentions for the children of your district. And I think it's important that the superintendent presume that when board members come to them with concerns or issues, that they have the best intentions for the children of their district as well, that none of what we bring forward is out of personal, you know, is for personal gain or for personal recognition, that everything that we bring up or that we share with each other is really because we care about kids. And so I think it's important to add that to both lists, so that both it's a two-way street when it comes to presuming that you all want the best for the children of your district.
Can I say something, Deb?
Sure, please.
And this may not be the place to have this conversation, but when we talk about the board all having the same information and that going through Dr. Breggy, I understand it in theory, but in practice, I don't think it's that clean of a practice, and not necessarily I mean, in terms of how do you follow that protocol? Because we go to different committees and we don't report back on every committee. You know, like there's a finance committee, or we go to the commissions, and typically we are giving a report, and that's kind of the end of it. But there are, you know, situations in those committee meetings or in commission meetings where there may be questions asked or answered that don't flow back to the board, that may be important to other board members or may not, but it certainly gives more background information, but we don't have like something set up for that reporting, so to speak. And then when, as a new board member, I would say, you know, if I ask a question, it may be a question that Noah and Rochelle and Tristan, I know, probably know already, but it's a question that I'm asking to get filled in. So I don't know in that situation, how do you, are all those questions go through Michael and then get filtered back to the board, even though it may be redundant for them to receive that information again? It's more kind of a getting up to speed.
So let me answer your last question first, and then we'll tackle the tougher one, your first question. So your last question about, does Dr. Breggy have to copy all of you on every question? No. No, that's why he has to make a judgment to say, is this just a new board member question that everybody else knows and I don't need to let the rest of the board know? Yeah, that's fine. But it's usually, we're talking specifically about agenda questions. So questions on the agenda and questions on things you're going to be voting on. So it's really important that if Tristan were to request an additional piece of information about, or some data points about something you're going to be voting on, that it's not just Tristan that gets that piece of information, that that piece of information be copied to the entire board. And so usually how it works is, you know, you guys have a deadline for when you submit questions on agendized items to the superintendent, and a deadline for them to get back to you. There's usually some sort of tracking mechanism so that all of your questions get answered by a certain period of time, and the entire board should be copied on any additional data points or any additional information that individual board members requested and were given, so that, again, so that you're all on the same page. And I think, or that was always happening when I was there before, we did have a mechanism for doing that. Is that still happening, Dr. Breggy?
For a short period of time, but then it restarted at the beginning of this new board session.
Yeah.
So we are all copied on the answers, and we all see the questions. It's not identified who asked what generally, but we see all the questions and answers before our meetings. Yes.
And that was due to, because I've always done this in my 12 years, but there was, we had a board member who was not comfortable with that, and so a couple board members. So that's when we stopped with the Q&A about questions. But when we then started that back up again after the board member was no longer on the board, we went back to it. So I just want it to be clear that that's not something that I stopped. But I do think that we do a really good job with that, and I do think that you know, we do try. You know, I try not to. I don't put anybody's name on there. I don't. You know, it's not about who's asking the question. So it's, you know, usually it's either no name, or if it's a follow up to the whole board, it's a board member has asked for clarifying information.
So
I think that works
Deb,
well, actually.
oh, sorry, Mary.
Go ahead.
Deb, I wanted to add on to something you said, because we've had different presidents in the past who, when they did the agendas, some of them would include updates from those commissions or liaisons that were necessary. For those that are doing the human relations and the health and safety commissions, there are times when there's nothing to bring back from those commissions to the board. When there was stuff to bring back, either myself, who was serving as the liaison, would ask the president to put that, or I would bring it up under board comments as a report, or would go into reports. Would be a great place to put those items. The other commissions, finance, facilities, they would come to us and make reports, quarterly reports, as they saw fit. So there was a structure in place that if necessary could be implemented. It's it should be as an as-needed basis, though. You don't want to just put a filler in and there's really nothing to report. Those organizations do keep in contact with us. There's several times the COC has to present to the board. You know, there's audit findings and reports. They have to come in front of us. So there's always an avenue for those things to do it in an organized way. The other thing I found as a board member over the years is that those of us that have kids in school, we all get different information as board members because our kids are in certain schools. So we're going to hear things that are not board issues, but they are things going on in the district. And you have to separate yourself from that as a parent/board member for just something that has to be governance, you know, and things that are happening or things that are not happening are not necessarily governance issues. They're just issues. And that becomes, when we get involved in those, that becomes micromanagement. So we have to be very careful to wear the right hat at certain times and recognize, hey, this is not, you know, this is not something that will be agendized. This is not our wheelhouse. So we have to be able to define that as board members, no matter where we are at any point, right? You know, whether a kid is able to schedule certain classes next year is not a board issue. It's going to come in front of us and we're going to get a lot of emails now, but it's really not a board issue. That's an issue for the administration, the people who do the master scheduling, and the counselors to deal with. And that's when we have to say, okay, this doesn't come to us until Dr. Breggy brings it to us for whatever reason. That's when it becomes a board issue. When he comes to us and says, I need the board to step in here, that's when that would happen.
I'll recognize just a second, Mary. I want to just comment on Noah's, what Noah said. I do think it's important, though, Noah, that when you do hear those things in the community, that you as an individual bring them to Dr. Breggy so that he knows there's a bit of a, you know, there's a bit of a chatter going on at school. I'm hearing from parents that this is a concern. This is probably going to come to you. You probably already know about it, but just in case you don't. So that's where we differentiate sort of what goes to the board and what goes to in that interpersonal relationship between individual board members and Dr. Breggy. I think he would want to agree, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that he would want to hear about anything that you're hearing in the community, not because you're asking him to fix it, just because you're letting him know that this is the chatter that you're hearing out there, the feedback that you're getting from parents, so he can have a heads up and he can make his staff aware that there are some issues being addressed.
I totally agree, Deb, and that does happen.
It does.
That's, I think, maybe
But it also happens
too
at,
often.
excuse me, no, it also happens at the adult level too, and the parent level,
Yeah.
where we at the board get chattered too, and we get our ears, you know, pinned back with.
I don't think we have a problem in that area.
No.
Good, good. So to Mary's question, though, you guys, I'm going to ask you this question. So in my experience, individual board members sitting on committees, it's their job to alert the committee when discussions at committee level happen that might be of interest to the entire board. It's their job to sort of be that person who keeps an eye on when things are going fast forward in a committee, to say to the committee, hey, guys, I'm just here to listen, because that's what a board member's job is on a committee usually, is to be that fly on the wall, to be listening and to be understanding and to have a little deeper knowledge about what's happening in that particular area. And then when things come up that you think the entire board should be aware of, or things are moving forward before you have board input on them, to alert the committee that maybe this is the time when you as a committee should be making a report to the board, either written or verbal. Is that happening? Is that how it happens with you guys? Or what do you see as your board member role in those committees, and what's that mechanism for reporting back to the entire board?
The last two times that has happened has been in great success, I would say, has been when the Finance Committee ran across pre-funding the OPEB program. And that came exactly how you're saying. It came with the murmurings of it in the committee, and it got to board members, and then we said, whoa, we really got to do this formally. And we did, and went down that path, and now it's been a budget line item since. The other thing I think recently would be the 7-Eleven committee and the recommendation for the waiver that we just voted on the resolution last night. That was a committee, it was formed, came up with something for the board, and we got it going as a board agendized item. So that, off the top of my head, those would be examples.
There was actually a couple more than that even. I know from the finance committee, when we,
I'm old.
when we, no, I know. I know you have more institutional knowledge. But even in recent years, when the finance committee had feelings about making a switch from one actuary to another last year, they wanted to communicate their feelings, and we agendized and had them come and present why they felt the way that they did. We've had them comment on audit reports and things like that. And they were actually the driving force behind the that meeting on April 8th, when we were talking about the appointments of new members to the finance committee. They're the ones that brought it up at the meeting in February. And the result of that meeting was I actually came back and emailed Mrs. Marcus and Dr. Breggy and said, these are the changes that the committee would like to the bylaws, in addition to which we have 2 new members to appoint. And these are the 2 board members next up in line to appoint according to staff. So that reporting is coming back. But there aren't, with the other committees, I mean, I sat on the Human Relations Commission for 2 years giving reports to them. It really was much more of a one-way direction. There was, I think, only one time that they actually had asked anything of the board. And what it was, there were kindness bracelets that had been distributed to kids at school, and they wanted pictures of the bracelets on the kids' wrists. So, we arranged and sent those. Anything to come back to the board to report.
I can remember coming back once from Human Health and Safety, where the city had decided that they were never going to have cigarette sales anymore in the city. And I brought that back to the board, but there was never any, unless it came out of our board board announcements at the end of the meeting. I always wished that there had been more of that so that we could hear what was going on, maybe picking 1 or 2 highlights of the meeting. And I always wanted to do that, but never really got the opportunity. That I never forced it, and I should have maybe. Going back to the meeting of April 8th, and I don't want to pursue it and get into it because I've tried to forget about it for the most part because of the lack of whatever agreement by the members of the board. And I only would like to say that the it was reported, and unfortunately by the guideline was one thing and the practice was another. And that was the problem there. And I don't want to get into it anymore. I do want to talk about something that occurred afterwards that really has been very upset by me, and I haven't forgotten it. And I'm waiting for this meeting to bring it up. And I think if this is okay, I'd like to bring it up at this time, unless you'd like me to wait till later.
Mrs. Marcus, by all means, speak your mind.
I am not a user of Facebook. I am not a user of chat. I don't believe in it. I try to stay away from it. I feel that I'm trying to keep a certain decorum of my behavior in public and as far as the board is concerned. But it happened that the following, after we made the announcements of the appointments for the Finance Committee and for the, after the appointment to the Facilities and Committee, there was a chat out there that I was sent. I didn't see it to begin with. People sent it to me about the comment that wasn't my appointment, that was my handler's. And then they would comment back, well, that appointment that's an UG for that appointment. And I found that to be above and beyond what is considered good governance. I haven't said anything about it in all this time. I've been harboring it, and it's been eating me up alive.
I know, Rochelle, and I wanted
to bring that out now because this is the chance that at this meeting to say something. And I know I'm sorry it's being, at this point, it is being televised, it is being aired, but I'm doing it in as nice a way as I can, that I was very hurt by that.
Well, Mrs. Marcus, I think, and again, I'm an outside observer, you guys, so I have to be honest with you. I think a lot of the discontent or the difficult discussions that you guys are having are based on personal hurt feelings, right? With things that have happened in the past. And so I think it's really important that those things be aired. I'd prefer, and I would caution you about airing them in public meetings. And I would encourage you to have one-on-one conversations with each other. So if Dr. Breggy did something that upset me, I would call him and talk to him directly about it. And hopefully he and I as 2 people could work out our differences and not work them out in a public forum. So I think it's really, really important that, again, that everybody, I don't want to get into a big discussion about it, Rochelle, but I wanted to be able to say what you wanted to say, because I think I talked about this at the beginning. Governance is a human experience. We're all humans with feelings and emotions, and you all do this work from the heart. I mean, there's a lot of heart in what you do. And sometimes the way board members behave breaks my heart, in all honesty. And I think it really impedes you doing good work. So I think it's important that when things like this happen, that they're aired. I'd prefer that in the future that they be aired between individual people. And you know what my feelings are about social media. I've told you all about it the last few times I was there. Social media should really only be used for informational purposes, for you guys to give information to your community about things that are going on in your district that are important to them, and to celebrate the successes, to celebrate the things that your children are doing, to celebrate the good work that your district's doing. It should not be a place for commentary about one another, or commentary about how things are being voted on, or commentary of any sort. So I'm sorry that you felt that way, Rochelle, and I hope that we can put it all behind us and move forward and agree. And we're going to look at our protocol for social media and agree that we're going to abide by it, right? Because I think it's really important.
At this time, it's also really important to talk about what it is that leads up to things like that. If we're going to go back to things that were offensive, the idea of a procedural meeting and an agendized item being personalized, and personal attacks being made, questioning someone's motivation rather than just sticking to the procedural item. I think that's probably where we need to spend a little bit of time also talking about good governance, because I think that certainly, based on everything that we're reading in this governance handbook, does not reflect good governance.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, Tristan, I think there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of history of hurt feelings, and a lot of history of, you know, people thinking the worst, and often not necessarily for any reason, of other people's motivations. But I think if we all take a look at what we just looked at earlier, and that we all presume, because I really believe this, I know all of you, I've talked to all of you, I think you're all there with the best intentions to do the good work of the district, and there shouldn't be any presumption that anyone's doing anything for personal gain or as a power play, that what you're doing. Yeah, there shouldn't be. And I would like you all
very clearly articulated.
Yeah, but I'd like you all to I think it's important that we put that behind us, and that we try to move on. You know, we can learn from our mistakes, or we can dwell on them. And I'd like this to be an opportunity to learn from our mistakes.
As long as that learning includes recognizing that that does not reflect well on the board and should not be repeated in the future, I'm fine with that.
I think you all agree. I think Noah said it at the last, the board meeting after that this is an anomaly, and that this isn't how we operate. And
but Noah,
I don't want to use your words, Noah, but I thought you did a very good job of sort of apologizing to the community for it, and saying that this is not how we operate, and this is not typical.
No, thank you. You know, last night is a better example of how we should operate. We got the board business done. I'll dwell on some other issues later on, but it's in a better direction. I just, you know, I'm sitting here listening to us starting this conversation again, and going back to what you said about focusing on students. And the minute we start down this road, we are not focusing on students. And I know there needs to be, some people need closure in this issue, or whatever it is. There's no closure. People were hurt. We have to move on as a board. And like Deb said, if there's personal issues, pick up a phone, go have a coffee, and deal with the personal issues. But we can't keep dragging this in public. It's not the place for it. And that is bad governance.
Thank you, Noah. So I'd like you guys to think about what your focus needs to be in the next year. Think about what your families and your children have been through in the last year, and what your staff has been through in the last year. There's a lot of trauma out there. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of learning loss. There's a lot of things that your energies and your conversations need to be focused on. And so I think it's really important to think about, again, when you agendize, when you have conversations, when you have board deliberation, really focusing on those things and not focusing on the past. And again, ask yourself this question. Put this line in your head so that you're always using this as the filter by which your words are generated. Are we focusing on children's needs, or are we focusing on adult needs? So think about that before you speak, and think about that before you put emphasis on particular issues.
And can I say something, Deb? Because I feel like, just piggybacking on that thought, we really did do that, because we were, there's both sides. There were, camps with that they didn't want us to return to school for in-person learning. And then we had, a camp that, of course, wanted us back right away. And so, and then everyone in between. And I think that's one thing that we did well. You had mentioned it at the beginning of this conversation that we really did make decisions what's best for students. And it turns out that with all of the MOUs, with 4 different labor unions, with the ongoing and ever-changing public health orders, that we were still able to bring students back for in-person learning. And again, not everybody was happy. A lot of staff not happy, but it was in the best interest of our students to come back. And we were one of the first districts in that first wave out of 80 school districts in LA County to come back. And we did that in the best interest of our students. And we had a very good return to in-person learning because of it.
Mm-hmm. No, I witnessed that. That was wonderful work. So I'd like to move on to this, what you have on your screen, which is Cabinet Intentions for a Positive Working Environment with the Board of Education. I think it's important that we revisit this because they put a lot of thought into this. And I can honestly say, if we followed all of these recommendations by cabinet, you probably wouldn't need protocols, because it's a pretty darn good list of how the board and cabinet should be working together. So just looking through it, the things that kind of come out to me are the positive intention, the assumption that the cabinet and staff are bringing you their best work. They're doing their best job to make recommendations to the board. And so they're education professionals, they're in the classrooms and in the trenches every day, trying to do the best work they can. So the board, although you should, you have the ability and you have the right to question and understand why they're making a recommendation to you, please assume that they have the best intentions for your students in mind. Cabinet members were really, really sensitive to and felt really, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They were uncomfortable with individual board members coming to them with questions or with specific recommendations or asking them to do certain tasks. And so I think you guys have conquered that one by making sure that everything goes through Dr. Breggy before it goes directly to cabinet members or to other staff members. That were really sensitive to having a really positive culture in the district, and that they felt that really begins with having a positive culture on the board. The redirecting of complaints, again, this is going to be directed in your protocols about what do we do when people come to us complaining about something? How do we handle that? Whose responsibility is it to solve that complaint or to address that complaint?
I think for the most part, we mostly send the complaint to Dr. Breggy. I will answer many of the complaints and just share with him what I'm saying to that person, so he'll be aware as I'm supposed to speak for the board. So for the most part, I will just say thank you for your email, and I'm sending this on. I appreciate your concerns, and I'm going to send this on to Dr. Breggy. And if I do make any other comment or whatever it is, it will go to him immediately. And I think the board is pretty well, for the most part, following that procedure.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of that, Michelle. That's what I'm told, that's exactly what you're doing. And that's the role of the president. It's really important that the president take on the role. So the other thing that staff brought up, and I thought it was pretty brave of them to bring up this point about wanting the board to be less accusatory in their questioning and more respectful in the way that they ask their questions. And I think I talked to a few of you about this on the phone, when I talked about what's the right way to ask a question or bring something forward, and what's the wrong way to do it. And the conversation sort of focused around when you need more information or when you want to get more in depth into a particular subject. I think I encouraged a few of you to focus on what's the question you're trying to answer, and working collaboratively with Dr. Breggy and staff to try to find the answer to the question, rather than trying to find the answer on your own by requesting reports or requesting data. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to, that Dr. Breggy or staff wouldn't provide you with reports or data if you wanted it. But I think a more direct line to getting your question answered is going to staff or going to your superintendent and collaboratively saying, here's the question I want to have answered. Where can I find these answers? Rather than trying to find them on your own. Does that make sense?
And Deb, can I answer Mandy's question that she put in the chat? That she had asked the question, if this is from our cabinet, if these are from our cabinet. And so before we had our first governance meeting, Mandy, we talked about how we wanted a positive working environment. So these were from us. So this was created by our cabinet, the cabinet that I still have today, minus Luke. And I will say that this has been, really very much, we really respect the fact that we most of these have been very good, and we appreciate that working environment. I think what's a little bit hard for my staff, again, we're a small district, and so sometimes the assumption is that because we're such a small district that we have all of this extra time, but it's all relative, because we have very small, we have departments that don't have any staff. It's just the one person. And so so some of the requests for some information that's been difficult lately, just because. And it was last, when we developed this too, because I think that there's always a need for people to get information. I just want to remind everybody, sometimes it takes a long time to, because we don't have the support staff to get a lot of that information, like some of the financial information and a lot of the, there's a lot of, research work, archival work, to get stuff. So that sometimes gets a little bit hard for the cabinet, and sometimes the cabinet is feeling like, is there a trust issue? Like somebody doesn't trust the decisions that we're making. Is this, is someone checking our work, or is someone, is there a trust issue? And so, that's come up several times, but I feel like, look, it's our job to provide information. Sometimes though, the information is just, we could hire somebody to do that work, because there's so much retrieval of information. So sometimes that gets a little difficult. Everything else on here, I feel like has been really, really positive, from the, from everything from tone to the camaraderie to, and again, look at the work that we've done so far together. And while these were developed, a year ago, we feel very good about where they're going.
Good. So Dr. Breggy, while you're speaking, let me ask you the question. If an individual board member has questions about a recommendation that is on the agenda, or something that the staff is recommending or talking about or moving forward on, and they want additional data, what would be the best, in your opinion, what would be the best way for them to accomplish that in a way that would not make the staff feel like there was a lack of trust?
So I think that if it's something that we're working on, like let's say, for example, data was changing quickly with the return to in-person learning. Well, all of that is pretty much at our fingertips. So we have a lot of that information. We're gathering that information from our principals. Like when things are asked, I'll give you an example, like, how many people will be returning to in-person learning at the elementary level? Well, that's something right at our fingertips. So that's easier to do. But if it's something from, before, like something that isn't right in our just like on the agenda and right that we're working with, that's from months ago, that's what it gets harder because that needs support staff, and that's but if it's kind of what we're working on now, the kind of current day recommendations and things on the agenda, that's absolutely easy to get. Those are things that are right at our fingertips. So it's usually it's things that we have to go back for, the retrieval parts.
Kristen, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just, I think so much of this, and I can say this now 2.5 years in, so much of this is, it just takes time, to get completely familiar with all the different things that are going on and what the histories are. And I think it's a good thing to want to have all of that background, but it's just not possible for the cabinet to completely download all of the background information for each one of these things in the time frame that we have between agenda posting and our meetings. And I think what I think is happening is there's a conflation of lack of ability to provide immediate answers to all these things with like a suspicion of not being transparent or trying to hide things. That's my personal belief. I kind of, that's the feeling I get even sometimes when I read, the questions that have been asked and the things that have been requested. And I think the cabinet's probably feeling a little bit of that too. I mean, on top of all their regular daily job, especially under these conditions in COVID, on top of that, they're getting slammed with production of documents, which makes it feel like litigation, something very sterile, instead of like, hey, I just would love to understand, a little bit of the history here. And I think part of that is just in the way that it's phrased and the way that people interact, and I would love for that to change, because I think that is part of what leads to, the staff feeling like, the lack of trust and the presumption of ulterior motives. I think it's really important for us as board members not to question people's ethics and integrity. I think everyone is doing an amazing job working really hard to try and deliver the answers to the questions that we have, to make sure that we are making the best informed decisions that we can. And I think it's just important for board members to keep in mind that there's a limit on the number of hours in the day that the staff can provide responses to, the questions that are being asked.
And keep in mind this, and you can see what's on your screen right now. This was written, 2 years ago, before COVID happened, and they were feeling overwhelmed with things then. So can you imagine with everything that they're dealing with now, how they're feeling?
We went right from reconfiguration into like COVID. So, I mean, it's been, I kept telling my team, who, again, it's not a complaint, but it's just, part of my job is to keep, our team together, and it's 7 days a week because changes are happening 7 days a week. And that's the job we signed up on for it. It's the job I love, to work 7 days a week. But I kept saying, look, it's going to get better after reconfiguration. So just please, we're going to make it. We're going to make it through reconfiguration. It's going to be successful. And we did. And then we just started, in our first year, we're 6-7 months in, to reconfiguration and watching this unfold before this happened. So it's a lot of it too, is just, we all have a lot going on, and certainly board members do, with hundreds and hundreds of pages to review and examine. But it's a lot of it's just keeping the team together and healthy, because it's truly 7 days a week that we are in contact with one another.
No doubt, no doubt. I also think it's important to recognize the way that a question or a piece of information or information request is framed. And so it's important that staff, or Dr. Breggy, or whoever you're asking the question of or for the information from, understand why you're asking it. And so I think it's really important for them to understand that in a lot of cases, and again, this was my experience anyway, in a lot of cases, I was asking for additional information or for answers to questions because it was questions that were coming at me from the community. The community were asking me, I'll give you for instance, we changed the bus route of how we picked up kids or where the buses went and where the pickup stops were. Well, I couldn't get out of the grocery store in less than 4 hours because of all the parents who were stopping me in the grocery store asking me why they didn't have a bus stop on their corner anymore, and then why we had changed the whole bus schedule and the bus route, et cetera. So I had to go to the staff and say, well, why did we change the bus route? What was the reason why we did this? I'm not questioning that we had a need, but I need to understand it so that I can explain it to my community members who have a concern about it. So I think if staff understands that you're asking the question or you're asking for information or you're asking for clarity, because these are questions you're getting in the community and you want to be the voice of the staff and the board and the district to explain to your community, to be that liaison and explain why things are happening, then I think they feel less threatened when they understand that you're there to defend them, or you're there to defend or clarify the actions of the board and of the staff to your community. You're not there asking questions to find wrongdoing.
Right,
So
and
I
I
think-
even just with some recent incidences, because I wish that I knew everything. I don't. It's sometimes I'm just as surprised that something wasn't handled correctly, or there was some communication issues that didn't happen with parents that should have happened when it did. I do feel like, the board is, I'll respond back because I know that board members are starting to get questions, but I was starting to get questions just at the same time as the board was. So then it's, finding out through the, my cabinet, like what happened, so the board's been really good about, of course I have to follow up and I need to follow up, but I may not have all of that information right at my fingertips, but I feel like the board's been really tolerant and it's given me some reasonable timelines to get back to them because they realize I'm not the one that's right there in the school that made the decision, so I feel like that's, I do have I have reasonable time to provide that information.
Okay. So ask yourself this question sometimes. What percentage of our time is devoted to student success and district goals? So the slide I have up for you, and I think I've shared this with some of you before, is that on the left column is the percentage of time that high-performing boards or boards that have made significant progress in making their district better spend on talking about these things. And then on the right-hand column is the national average of the amount of time that boards spend talking about these things. So notice that student learning and achievement, high-performing boards spend at least 50% of their time talking about that, and 50% of their time measuring strategic plan progress, and if they're making progress toward their goals. And the national average, they spend 60% of their time talking about facilities and finances, right? And
Certainly, that's the category we fall into.
yeah, so you want to be on the left-hand column, guys. You want to be spending the majority of your time talking about student learning and achievement and student and progress toward your plans, and a lot of your time spent on community linkages, making sure you're getting correct community input and spending a lot of time talking to your community about the things that you're accomplishing and how you're making progress toward those goals. Don't be in the national average of spending, at CSBA, we call it like the killer bees: buses, books, bonds, and buildings. So don't let yourself fall into that category of spending the majority of your time talking about things that are not kid-centric. So I love this quote from Peter Drucker. It's really easy to talk about strategy and putting things in writing in the stroke of a pen. The hardest thing to change and execute is strategies that require changes in human behavior. And so that's why our protocols are so important. And I think it's important that we understand them all. And with that said, I would like you all to talk to me or pull out what protocols you thought it was important to discuss. But first, I'm going to show you my list. Here are the things that I thought were important to discuss. I thought it was important to discuss, and if you have this same one, just let me know and I'll put a star next to it. The role of the board when questioning staff recommendations. How should we do this? And how can we work in a way that's collaborative for all? So what do we do with, how do we individually ask questions of staff? I think there needs to be a common understanding on the use of committees and board members' role on committees. And I know that at this last meeting, you just clarified the process for committee appointments. So I think it needs to be, and I've said this to all of you, consistent committee by committee on what the process is for appointing, and it needs to be transparent so that you all understand it. We're going to go over the current protocol in the use of social media and see if we need to strengthen it or add to it. And then the role of the board with regard to behaviors that influence public confidence. So I'd love to get your guys, I'm going to open up your governance handbook now. So I'm going to stop sharing this. And I'm going to open up your governance handbook, which I have teed up here. And are there any protocols that you guys want to discuss or have identified need additional clarification?
Yes.
Go ahead, Noah. Which one?
We'll start. Number 1, focus time and energy on student best interest.
What page are we on, Noah?
We're under norms and protocol, page 8, I think.
Page 8, okay. So talk to us about that while I get there.
Well, we don't do this. It's number 1 on our norms and protocols. It's the most percentage of highly performing board, what we spend at meetings. And I think the issue is we do spotlight on students now. That's something that we've been doing for a few months. Honestly, as a board member, it's great to see student accomplishments and to see what the students are doing. That's eating up a lot of our meeting, because what we're not doing is actually looking at data, discussing methodology, discussing what needs to get done to actually achieve our goals. You know, that we don't talk about there. The only topic ever left off an agenda in my 10 years has been ed services. Human resources is always on there. Business is on there. Planning of facilities is on there, without a doubt. The only thing that sometimes skips a beat is ed services. So if that is what's going on, I think it's important to address this in our norms and protocols, to have something in place to make sure that every time we meet, you know, formally it's only twice a month. So we should be touching upon something. There should be something. We're not where we want to be yet as a district. So why are we not talking about the journey there? Right? That's my point. So I think it's important, and I don't want it to be fluff. I want it to be real. And even if it doesn't require a board vote, there's still something called discussion item, and we could still discuss it. So we could still bring things in front of the board for a discussion, for informational purposes. You know, Dustin Seaman does a wonderful job when he does get to present of giving us data, of giving us information. And I just think I can't get enough of it, you know, and never to the point of excess, never to the point of, you know, we need to just have a filler. But when I first started out on the board, I was adamant about saying, when are we going to talk about education? So this is not a new issue. This is not a Dr. Breggy issue. It's not this board issue. This has been an ongoing issue in this district. It's the thing we don't talk about, right? People come in public comment and talk about, you know, teachers talk about they're upset about the bell schedule last night. Parents talk about a personnel issue and moving a class and all this. Nobody's talking about the quality of education. And that to me is really missing a beat in our district, because if we're not having the conversation as a board and the community isn't having the conversation as a community, who's talking about it? Nobody's talking about it. And this is why you plateau and you don't move forward and up as a district, because people are not taking this as a priority and saying, I know we're not going to change scores overnight. I know we're not going to change results. I know we're not going to come first in the Academica in the state tomorrow. I know that's not going to happen. But 10 years already, let's talk about it so it can happen one day, because it's not going to happen on its own.
And Noah, if I can respond to that, because of course, completely agree. And I think sometimes it's putting structures and supports to things. And so to Mrs. Marcus's credit, she's been asking me this for many months now. And that is a governance calendar that has, every month and so you can anticipate like a kind of the year at a glance. And so since data becomes available at different times for different things, that it doesn't solve the whole problem, but it would be nice that when we are receiving some of this data, that it's timely for one thing, because a lot of times you get it and it was months ago. But if we could create, like with the governance calendar, that, because it's not just reporting it once, it's the board becoming familiar with the data, how it's being assessed, how it's being calculated, and then seeing the improvement the next time. So if we can get into a better system, a better structure of and it's a little bit like each meeting, that there is then kind of a pattern of us sharing this information and it being on this calendar so that you're aware of that it's coming, that we could do a better job of kind of like planning out for the whole year when we're presenting information.
So we seem to be gathering data all the time, right? Not just on a state level, but also on a local level or
Right.
even a site level. Could we talk about things like, we collected this information, we have this information about our third grade reading results, right? We kind of, and let's take the wrapping off of this and let's say, okay, for better or worse, these are the results of how our third graders are reading, but we're talking to the community about this. It's a discussion item, right? Here's what we're thinking about doing because X, Y, and Z of these results, because this is the data we have, to let you guys know that we're addressing this. We see some weaknesses here. We're addressing this. Here's how we're addressing it. Great. We're talking about education. We're talking about what we're doing to change results for the better. It's that kind of thing. It's one specific slice of the pie that we could take a look at and digest it, at a meeting. It's just, I feel like if we're not talking about it, we're not doing anything. And I have to tell you, the results would back me up on this, right? So this board in this district has, and you guys have done an amazing job with the strategic plan. And COVID aside, I understand all of that. So I'm not saying that this, the last year was a hiccup in all of this, but moving on in the future, what are we doing now? We have an update coming up about the strategic plan, I think.
It's the next
right?
meeting.
Yeah, the next meeting. So that's the start of the conversation, right? That's what I'm talking about. So what's going to be the next thing that we're going to talk about? Because
Right.
we're never done, right? We're not the #1 district in the nation, so we're not done. Nor
Right.
will we be necessarily, but that's not what I'm shooting for. But I'd always like to be trying, right? That's the goal.
And that's what I was thinking. No, it's like it may be like the first trimester where the third grade reading results come out. So to be able to know it, so that the board can even anticipate that, in November, we're going to be sharing with you reading results for, elementary. Because it would be nice, because the governance calendar that Mrs. Marcus has been asking for, it would make it much more comprehensive if we're able to put things like what happens in each month, so that you're aware that it may be a first interim, it may be, third grade reading assessments, that data comes in. So you know what I mean? So that we can get so that even the board can anticipate what's going to be happening at each meeting.
Well, and also, Dr. Breggy,
Sorry.
governance calendar is important, and thank you, Rochelle, for advocating for a governance calendar, because I'm a big
Trust
fan.
me. Trust me. Yes.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important not only that the board know when you're going to be addressing things, but what it does is it forces you to agendize student learning achievement at every meeting. It forces you to do that because you know that at almost every meeting. I'm not going to say at every meeting. Some meetings, like when you're adopting budget or something, it's too all-encompassing. You don't have time for that. But at least you know that the majority of your agendas, that at least 25%, I mean, that would be a good start. 25%, 30% of your agenda is going to be focused on your progress toward student learning and achievement goals, your progress on the superintendent's, the goals that you were given, Michael, by the board, in terms of student achievement. So at least you know that you're going to get an update. The other reason it's important is if you can publish one every 6 months, every year, quarterly, whatever it may be, your community then knows when you're going to be talking about those things. So your community who has a second grader going into third grade, who might be interested in when they're going to be assessed with regard to reading levels, knows that in March, you're going to be doing a report on what they are, what you're going to do to make them better, and what the time frame is for that. So your community can be aware of what you're going to be talking about when, a year in advance, not just 30 days in advance or a few days in advance, and know when they can attend a meeting that might be of interest to them. And you can, again, this helps you too in evaluating your superintendent, because you know that he's giving you little progress reports on his progress toward the goals that you've given him at the beginning of the year. And so when you get to the middle of the year or the end of the year, it's no surprise if you've made progress or haven't made progress, and you can make micro adjustments or pivot in order to make progress toward those goals, because you're measuring them as you go along. So it's really, really important. And I would really suggest that you strive toward, at least if you can't do the whole governance calendar with what you're going to be doing with everything, at least do the student learning and achievement portion of it, and decide when you're going to get reports on various elements of student learning and achievement.
No, we already have it planned. So we're doing it with our leadership retreat this summer like that. So we're doing it anyway. We're going to we're and everybody's there. So it's like, we're going to, it's easier to do that with everybody in the room. And so, we feel very good about that happening in June.
There was a time when I started that the only thing we ever talked about was Metro, right? That had flared up when I got on the board, and that was the topic. That was it. Metro, bond construction, all that stuff. I would like, now that Metro is not part of the conversation as much anymore, it's nice to kind of have the community be able to tune into a board meeting and say, what are they doing next with education? Look how serious this community is taking education. We in our minds, I think most of us on the board have a vision and a mission that we're shooting for, where this district should go, where we'd like to see it when we all finish our terms up. And it starts with the conversation, right? It starts to admitting, like a 12-step program, right? It's Education's Anonymous. So we're admitting there's a problem, right? And then we're going to talk about, we're going to share our stories. We're going to face the good and the bad, and we can address it. And by the way, there's an opportunity for the board to always be able to ask Ed Services, how can we help, right? How can we help? And that's really comes down to programming and expenditures. That's what it's going to circle back to as far as Ed Services. So if we know there is a deficiency in an area and we talk about it, then we can actually spit out the question, hey, by the way, is there something we could do about this? Do you need an extra person? Do you need an extra program to augment this A, Y, and Z? A lot of the times that comes to us, but sometimes by having the conversation, it may be organic, and it may come out of just the conversation at a board meeting.
And
So
I don't think it's a bad thing that, the high school math teachers know that we're going to have a conversation about the progress of math in our school.
And that was my last point. Exactly. That the fifth grade teachers, are going to know that I think there's a writing test in fifth grade, right?
Yeah.
Fifth, right. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the results of that. We're going to see, hey, you know what? A lot more fifth graders can't write an expository or persuasive essay than we thought. Let's take a look at the whole picture here, instead of just throwing up a, once a year CASP data and cover the whole district in one child. Let's break it into the parts and spend the time, a little bit of time, not a lot. And like I said, I don't want this to drag meetings out. I'm not out for that. I'm just saying we have to just make education a focus.
Well, it's the accountability piece too. Like, many times the teachers and principals don't realize that, we are looking at something, and that is part of what we do. So there is the accountability piece that I think everyone needs. We're all accountable.
We also can't skip over the grades that don't have testing every year. We're going to have to also put some attention and focus and ask the teachers and the parents also, where there are deficiencies and where we need to focus for the grade levels that don't have this.
Yeah, but Tristan, that's why I said there's local metrics. There's not just the state testing, there's local metrics that we can
in
that we can
scheduling
use.
them and in having these conversations. Hopefully they'll be ongoing and we'll have something at every meeting to talk about. I don't want to skip over any grade bands or subject matters.
I believe that before COVID, I believe that from grades 2 through and at the elementary level, which is where I spent time, that 2 through 8, they all tested every year. I mean, it was testing every year on all the students. The only one that wasn't was science, but they all had English and language arts and math. So there was testing along the way, and I agree with Noah that what we need is the data is important, but what we do with the data is something else again. And that's the most important thing, is the plan that the cabinet comes up with, how to address the deficits or the strengths, and how to make it grow and make us grow even better. And therein lies, that's the challenge, is to use that data and really help our students do better.
Those are good suggestions.
Good. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot, new board members. Mandy, did you have any protocols that you wanted to, that you felt we're running out of time, unfortunately, that you felt you wanted to address or had concerns or wanted some clarification on? And just tell me the page number.
You know, not protocols per se. I mean, when I read through it, a lot of it seemed very, how do I say this? Not vague, but kind of, just like, it seemed, I guess because I'm in psychology, so I often hear a lot about how to get along with it. So it seemed a bit to me like, I don't know the word, pat, I guess, but important nonetheless.
Common sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. But probably because I live and breathe this kind of thing, although not on a governance level, more so on, dealing with, how people get along and all that. But what I want to ask you, sort of backing up to what we were all just talking about, I was thinking how it's interesting how we have committees and board groups of people that are experts, adult experts, on a variety of things. So the bond measures, the facilities, buildings, finance. I mean, it really would be interesting. I was thinking about why wouldn't there be a community-based commission or someone that advises us, that is about something like, just an assessment commission or a STEM committee or a math one. And then I was thinking the reason why is because in the larger community, there are not professionals who are available to do that, because a lot of those people are teachers and they're working all day, and understandably, they're not going to go join a commission, and it would be a conflict of interest, obviously, if they were teachers from our own district. But I was thinking, that's probably part of the reason why there can't be like a body that is making recommendations and using these brains and expertise to come up with things about very education and pedagogy specific ideas. Because for finance, there's a lot of attorneys out there. There's a lot of business people who are available to do that. But there aren't a lot of educators who are available during the day or who are not teaching in Beverly Hills, so therefore can't be a part of a committee. But do you see what I was saying? Like, it's amazing.
And you know what, Mandy, that was you guys have, do you have an LCAP committee, a local control accountability plan committee?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was supposed to be the purpose, governor purpose of the local control accountability plan, is that part of what's mandated in the LCAP is community input. And I think it's the thing that districts struggle with the most, is how do we get community input? Now, I want to tell you that in some districts I work with, there's a great amount of interest in being on the LCAP committee or contributing to the LCAP committee from the industries of that district. In particular, Silicon Valley has some of the brightest minds available in the world who sit on their LCAP committee or give input to their LCAP committee with regard to technology. Math, science, and technology, because they want their children to contribute to the industry of that community. And so a lot of business leaders love to be involved in that. So really and that's one of the roles of board members, is really to talk to people in your community about what's important to their children, or what important skills they want their children to have coming out of your district, and to get involved in articulating that and finding maybe some thought leaders in your community in those industries who would contribute. Not necessarily sit in a committee, but at least contribute their written response or their, one time consultation with the staff about, you know, if you want to get into this industry, here's what skill sets children need to know. And so that was the impetus for the LCAP. It was all about getting community input on what was important to your particular community for their children. But again, they sort of gave us that mandate without the budget to hire communication professionals to achieve that goal for us. So a lot of districts really struggle with that because they just haven't had the outpouring of community interest in being part of those committees.
Yeah, I figured as much.
How about you, Mary? Were there any particular protocols or things that you felt needed clarification for you?
You're on mute.
You're muted, Mary.
Sorry about that. Actually, what I had on my list was the governance calendar, because I thought that that would be a great tool, and I think we've already discussed it. I think I actually learned about it from doing the MIG courses, and it just seems like that's a great way for us to focus on the strategic plan, and you know, because all those things are kind of like benchmarks can be benchmarks along the way throughout the year. That's by nature in the calendar, that then helps us to stay focused on the strategic plan, which I think is really where we're identifying, if I'm correct, what our goals are, our short-term goals and our long-term goals, and to really try and keep that a living, breathing document and keeping it accountable. And I know that this year, especially because of COVID, that's been hard to do. Not that it's not happening, but to be, you know, having that kind of regular reporting about really like, how are we doing on what the goals that we've, you know, established as a district between the board and with the cabinet for what we want to achieve, and how are we tracking there. So for me as a new board member, I just don't know, like, when do we, you know, are we just going to wait to the end of the year and then just have a strategic planning report, or do we throughout the year kind of check in and see how do we readjust or, you know, reallocate resources, be it people or money or what have you, to help us achieve those goals that we've already identified? Because I think that thinking is already there. So now let's really support it and have regular dialogue. So I do think that calendar is helpful. And I think that as well for the board to add to that calendar, because I wasn't clear who developed that calendar, if it was the board or with you, Dr. Breggy. So I do think it is a missing piece, I think, and will be really useful for us, especially in times like COVID. Had we had a calendar in advance, like if that was something that we always have when we have things that throw us off, at least we have that framework to kind of keep bringing us back.
Yeah, and it's the type of thing that once it's developed, then at least you have, you know, you have a basic idea of when things happen, you know, when the cycle of things happen. And it's much easier to keep updating that rather than creating it. And so with reconfiguration and COVID, and so we have plans to do that. And we'll be doing that this summer. June is when we're working on that. And then to answer your other question, and again, you know, the pandemic has had more of an impact on our team professionally and personally than anything in my lifetime. And so that's why the strategic plan, there's been a lot of progress. And so at our next board meeting, we're actually doing an update, and our whole leadership team will be there to present, and you'll be surprised at how much progress we actually have made during the pandemic. But that's when we'll do that. But typically we would be doing more updates with the strategic plan. It's just that all of the work with return to in-person learning, that definitely took all of our time. But there's a lot of work to be able to show and be proud of, and we're going to do that the next meeting. But the governance calendar, and Mrs. Marcus has asked me 100 times for it. And so, but that will be done very soon.
Yeah, and I understand that because of COVID, there's been so much going on, and it wasn't expecting that it would be delivered at this moment. But you know, in terms of goals and setting goals, that's why I thought this
And
is,
it's good for our team too, because like, you know, I know when the final budget's approved, but you know, Dustin doesn't. So it's just as good for our cabinet to have that governance calendar as it is for our board and our community.
yeah, I mean, I think also, Noah, it's like what you said with the agenda, when we look at that, you know, when you look back on it, you can kind of get a sense of what categories are we not talking about often. And I think the calendar can serve as a tool for everyone as well to look and see, are there gaps anywhere that we want to, you know, fill in? It's easier to see when you look at a calendar, I think, for everyone to kind of, you know, focus on that and see like what's missing here, or what are we doing too much of, or I don't know. It just seems like it's a great tool.
And Mary, to answer your question about who develops it, it's usually started by staff. So we have a template on our website that usually executive assistants start with, because it tells you when all the legal stuff has to happen. Like, when do we have to adopt a budget, or when do we have to submit an LCAP, or, you know, when do we know what our final funding is? We fill in all the known things and calendars with regard to the state and your funding. And then usually executive assistants look at prior board packets and say, oh, every June we talk about X. And so we'll put that in June. So it's usually, the shell is started by staff. And then it's really important that the board members review it and say, you know what, we'd really like to see data-driven reports quarterly. So let's plug that into, you know, January, March, and August, or whatever it may be. So it starts with staff, and then it goes to the board for their input about the kinds of things that they want to see on it and when they want them reported. And then it's a living, breathing document, so that as things come up in board meetings that you guys want reports on or answers to, or committees, you know, reports to you, you plug them in the calendar when you see that there are gaps where there's time for them. So that's sort of how the process works. Okay, anybody else who had protocols that they wanted to in particular discuss? Tristan,
So
page number, please.
the norms and protocols, it starts on page 8, but goes to page 9.
Okay.
Number 3.
Yes. Tell me about what you're thinking about on that one.
I think that it's really important to remember that we're here to do a job. And as you had said earlier, this is a business meeting to do the business of the district. And I think it would be very helpful to the board that when we're discussing topics, even when there's different opinions, that it's done in a manner that is business-like, that would happen in a company boardroom or conference room, no different than it's happening at the dais. So if there's a point of disagreement, that it's reasonable to explain why you disagree, but as this norm and protocol says, we will not attack another person verbally. I think that's a really important part of how we're supposed to do what we do.
Well, and also for a bigger reason than that, even, Tristan, not just that it looks unbusinesslike or unprofessional, but kids are watching your meetings. People don't believe it, but you know, they were all stuck inside. Their parents are watching your meetings. I don't know about your guys' meetings, but other meetings that I observe, we've never had 140 people at a board meeting at this district I've worked with, but there are 140 people online watching it. And there's been another 100 downloads of it from YouTube, you know, a week later when word got out. And so it's important to understand that we're modeling for our children what leadership looks like. And so, you know, I think about that even in these workshops that I do. If my sons were watching this, would they be proud of the work that I'm doing? Do they think I'm handling myself in a professional manner? Do they think I'm, you know, speaking in a way that people can understand and not talking over people or you know, trying to act like I'm more intelligent than I am, or putting on airs? You know, am I modeling the kind of behavior that I'd want them to think is the behavior of a good leader? And
The
so,
other thing too is that how we interact in board meetings sets the tone for how our team is going to be able to work as a team or not. And so when things are presented in a combative, personalized way, that automatically sets up an environment that doesn't foster teamwork.
yeah. Well, and I'm going to give you an example. So I'm working with a group tomorrow, and I'm not going to tell you who they are, but it's the third time I've worked with this group. They've lost 6 key staff members in the last year and a half, not because of the COVID workload, not because of anything that's happening in the district that's bad, because of the way that the board treats their staff and treats one another. It's a toxic environment.
Yeah.
And they're going to lose one of the best superintendents in the state because of the way that they, one or two board members actually are guilty, talk to the superintendent and publicly embarrass and accuse the superintendent. Now, I don't see you guys doing that at anywhere near that level, but it does have a long-term effect on the district. I mean, this district 6 years ago when I first started working with them was really high functioning, was really making things happen on behalf of kids. And all the people who are responsible for that have left and are going on to other places because they didn't want to personally subject themselves to that culture. And so it starts with you. The culture of a district starts with all of you. And it's really, really important that you set the tone for the culture of, inclusiveness, respect, how you want to speak to one another, how the community perceives you and how staff perceives you. And, like I said earlier, everyone's been through a traumatic year, especially your staff members who have never probably worked harder. And so really, really important to set a really positive tone, to be very supportive of them. It doesn't mean you don't question them. It doesn't mean you don't get your questions answered, but for the most part, to be supportive and for them to know that you have their back and you have each other's back as well.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about is actually one of our, it's in our bylaw, 9271, but that's in our handbook on page 10.
Okay, let me get there.
Talk about, it's the third from the bottom, the asterisk. It talks about constantly being aware that a board member has no legal authority except when acting as a member of the board. Board members shall present their concerns and concepts through the process of board debate. If in the minority of any decision, they shall abide by and support the majority decision. When in the majority, they shall respect divergent opinions. I think this goes hand in glove with Robert's Rules of Order. And I think it's really important to emphasize that we are a deliberative body, and the intent of a deliberative body is to deliberate and discuss until we actually reach conclusion in order to take a vote. I think it's really important that forcing a vote to curtail discussion is not a method that's employed. I don't think it's good for the district. I don't think it's good for any governing body. But I think it's a good reminder and an opportunity to have the discussion about the fact that we all need to be able to have our say before we actually call for a vote, that it shouldn't be weaponized to try to conclude a conversation.
So I want to speak to that because this is a place where lots of boards struggle. It's okay to disagree. So first I'm going to say it's okay to disagree. That's democracy. That's why you all were elected. You were elected for what you represent. People voted for you based on what they felt you represent, if you represented the same sort of feelings that they had about things. So it's important that each of you have the opportunity and the time and feel safe to express your opinions. But remember that you're not only expressing your opinions, you're expressing the opinions of those people that you represent. So really, really important to keep that mindset at the top of mind before you speak. Is what I'm saying and what I'm proposing representing the majority of the people that I represent, the majority of the people in my district, or is this my own personal bias or my own personal opinion? So that's really, really important. So it's important that you feel comfortable expressing those opinions in an open and honest and transparent fashion. It's also important that others don't necessarily try to debunk your opinion or get personal about your opinion, but they feel safe to express their own opinions. Now, sometimes that gets out of control, and I've watched it get out of control with lots of boards that I've worked with. And so it's really important that all of you feel comfortable when you feel like the conversation is going awry or the situation is out of control, not just the board president has this responsibility, but all of you have the responsibility to just say, hang on a second, I'd like to make a motion, or I'd like to propose that we take a 5-minute break. We all get our thoughts together and come back and deliberate in a respectful way, or in a way that is concise, where we all get 2 or 3 minutes to make our point, and then we call for the question, right? So it's okay for any of you, if you feel uncomfortable with what's going on, not just the board president, to be able to do that, because sometimes it's hard for the board president to constantly sort of be the moderator of the conversation. So it's important that all of you feel comfortable doing it, knowing that Dr. Breggy really can't do it. So I see a lot of boards, look at their superintendent and like, why aren't you doing something? Well, they really can't do it because you're their boss, right? And to interrupt their boss's conversation is usually not a good move on the part of an employee. So really, really important that you all feel comfortable being able to do that. And then, be respectful of one another's opinions. If you don't agree, listen, make your notes about what you're going to say about it. But in the end, the board vote is what's important. In the end, once the vote is taken, whether you agreed or disagree, it's important to either stand behind the vote of the board, or at the very least not be an impediment to the vote of the board. So posting something negative about it on social media is being an impediment. If you can't stand behind it, at least don't be an impediment to it moving forward. And if the media would ask me, and I sat on the board in the day of when newspapers and radio stations and TV stations actually covered what we were doing and cared a lot of the time, even when it wasn't controversial. I'd be walking out of a board meeting and they'd say, Deb, how do you feel that what you were proposing got voted down? And I would say, you heard what I had to say during board deliberation, or what I had to say, my points were in the minutes. I'm not going to repeat them. And out of the respect for my fellow board members, I respect that they voted their conscience, and I won't be an impediment to that moving forward. I don't have to say I agree with it. I don't have to say, yeah, I'm 100% behind it. But I do have to say, keep your comments, keep your opinions alive during deliberation, and let them die after the vote is taken, unless you can either get behind it.
I agree with all of the things that you've just said. I don't know that really specifically deals with what my concerns were. My concern is that when we've had a chance to each go around and say something once, but a topic is not concluded, to call for a vote in order to force closure of a conversation, particularly when there have been comments that were made that were very specific and personal, in order to just not hear a rebuttal, I think, in fact, I know that is not consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. We are all supposed to have our say and contribute our viewpoints, and even be able to rebut when there are accusations, particularly that are made, before a vote is called. And so my concern is to make sure that, particularly in a situation where there's conflicting opinions, that there isn't an effort to simply shut down the conversation after delivering a drive-by comment and just call for the vote. I don't think, in fact, I don't believe that it's right. Do you feel like you need more, do you feel like you need a more solid protocol on board deliberation? Because I could tell you, a lot of boards I work with, and one I just recently worked with last week, they had 2 board members, they're a 7-member board, and they had 2 board members who loved to pontificate, who just really derailed the meetings by talking for 45 minutes in circles about a subject. So they had to really, because their meetings were going till 2 in the morning. They had to put together a protocol that basically said, we each get 4 minutes to make our point, and we go around a maximum of 3 times, and then we call for the vote. They had to do it because— I'd be open to adding in that we go around more than once. I don't know that we need to assign a number to it, but I think it shouldn't be that it's only once and then brought to closure.
How do the rest of you feel about that? What do you think? Do you think it's necessary?
I think we're rehashing an issue that, once again, was a personal issue that flared up at a board meeting. It hasn't happened since. Let's once again, I direct us to last night's meeting where everybody was given an ample opportunity to address the issues, even the issue that we all had some disagreement on. We did it very cordially. We wound up tabling the issue. We withdrew it and tabled it. get some more information on it, and try to find consensus. That's a healthier way to move forward. I don't believe that this board needs any restrictions on conversations. I think if what you said, Deb, is if things ever flare up and get personal again, that's the time to take a recess. Not just leave the motion on the table, take a recess, because we have to conduct the business of the board. You know, we have to just, if it gets to that point, we have to remind ourselves, wait a minute, this is getting personal. And it's okay, we're human beings. You said earlier in your slide, this is a human experience, right? We can't deny the fact that we're human beings and we're going to be attached. But if I always remind myself of, over the 10 years I've been here, 99% of the votes are 5-0, right? So it's very few and rare and far and few between that we've actually disagreed on stuff. And that's okay, as long as we did it cordially like we did last night. So I don't want to keep belaboring what happened in the first quarter of this year, okay? There was some stuff that we all recognized as not our finest hour, and we need to move on completely. And when we say move on, we have to really move on. So by even bringing it up again, we're stopping our own progress. And I'm not a fan of that.
Session that is supposed to talk about governance and what good governance looks like. So if we are not, I mean, it was on the first page of the presentation today to talk about what are the things that we did well and what are the things that we were not doing well. So if this is not the time to talk about a meeting that went sideways and the reasons why, with accountability, and Deb, you actually even said it, if we go back to your first couple of slides, assigning responsibility. If that's not what we're here to do, then why was that on the beginning of the slideshow?
Tristan, you're bringing up the results of one particular instance. So I don't think it defines. You have, Rochelle. Let me just finish my sentence, please.
Okay.
You've brought up these of one particular instance. It was dragged out over a couple of meetings. I understand that, and you're right. We're here to define what good governance is. I get that. So let's define good governance, but we don't have to keep revisiting it based on one instance. We should do it holistically. Is what I'm saying.
I'd just like to mention that an example of correction going forward was last night's discussion. I thought it was done very well. I think we didn't all agree on something. There was no attack and there was nothing. It was just a chance to air how we felt. We've gone forward, and I agree with Noah.
And I want to assign responsibility to each and every one of you. It's not just your president's job to keep the meeting in order. I want to assign responsibility to each and every one of you to not only check yourself, but to check each other. So if you have a feeling like the meeting's going sideways again, I want not just your president to be responsible for stopping it, but Noah and Mandy and Mary and Tristan and all of you to feel like you have the ability and you have the authority and you have the power to stop the meeting, take a break, and refocus. And I think that's the solution, all of you taking responsibility. And you know, it's 5 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to say this to you. If I close on no other point, it's this. We get attacked enough. I don't know about you guys, but when I was on the board, there were enough people coming during public comment, attacking or criticizing or being critical of what we do and what we were accomplishing. You all need to have each other's backs. You're the last people in the world that need to be critical of one another. You really have to support one another and believe in one another and work on the relationships that you have with one another, because there's enough outside influences attacking you and being critical of what you're doing already that you really need to close ranks and be there for one another. So I hope you can put whatever hurt feelings or bad experiences you've had behind you and really take this opportunity. If we do nothing more today, then hit the reset button and say, going from this day forward, we know what good governance looks like. We did it at last night's meeting, and that's how we're going to continue to operate. So anything else, being respectful of your time. I have all the time in the world, guys. I'm just stuck in the house here in cold, chilly Lake Tahoe. Anything else you want to discuss before we conclude tonight, or do you feel like we've made a little bit of progress?
Did you hit all your points on this page that you wanted to, Deb?
I
Because-
think we have for the most part, Noah. I do. I think, and I open it up to, and I say this to all of you, any of you have the ability to call me at any time with any frustrations or questions that you have, and I will try my best to give you some examples of best practices, not my personal feelings about how things should be handled, but some examples of best practices of things that have happened in other districts, because nothing's happening in your district that I haven't seen a dozen times over the last 7 years. So
Deb, can you go back to the first, the 4 corners that you came on with at the very beginning?
sure.
Like,
You mean the 4 pillars of effective governance?
well, I wasn't sure if it was the 4 pillars or it was the one just before that. You had 2 diagrams, or maybe it was just one. I'm not sure.
The 4 color splotches?
Okay, let me stop this one and go back to the other.
I think that's the pillars, Deb.
Okay, let me go back.
So we also, if you have time to review quickly, the difference between what board does and what staff does, the how
Yeah.
and the what. Would be really
Yes.
helpful.
Let me get out of this, stop share.
No, that's not it.
No, I know, I'm trying to get there. It doesn't want to let me get there. Okay, let me close this. Okay. It keeps saying sharing screen has failed to start. Ah, there we go. Okay, so let me get back to the beginning. So this was the 4 pillars of effective governance. Having a unity of purpose, understanding your roles and responsibility, positive team governance and norms, and support structures and process and protocols. So you want me to get to the job of the superintendent and the job of the board. Let me get to that for you. Oh, you know what? I don't have that in this, I don't have that in this presentation. But I could tell you, just briefly.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, what the board needs and what the superintendent needs.
Is that what you wanted? Is that what you wanted, Tristan?
No, I was actually going back to one of our prior sessions where Deb kind of delineated the difference between what the staff work is and what the board work is. Like,
so let me just talk you through it, because it's pretty simple, Tristan. I don't even need a slide to illustrate it. The job of the staff or the board is to determine the what we want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
An example of that might be we want to increase math scores across the board, or we want all 2nd graders to be able to have a 2nd grade reading ability, or whatever that may be. You determine the what. Then the superintendent goes back to the staff and says, here's what the board, here's their number 1 priority. Here's what the board wants to accomplish. And they've determined the building blocks for accomplishing that goal. They determined the how we're going to do it, right? To increase math scores, we're going to have teachers have additional classes in new teaching methods. We're going to bring in a new math curriculum. We're going to test more often to get benchmarks for where students are going to be. So then the staff comes back to you and says, okay, you wanted us to increase math scores. Here's our plan to do that. And then the board and staff come together and say, okay, how are we going to measure if it's working or not? A year from now, we're going to look at scores. We're going to test kids. We're going to look at, have the benchmark now, and we're going to see if we're doing better in 18 months, in 2 years, in a year, whatever that benchmark might be. And then it's the board's job to assess whether we're moving fast enough toward that goal or not fast enough toward that goal, and what we need to do to change in order to accomplish that goal. So it's important that board members stay in the what we want to accomplish and don't delve into the how we're going to do it, because that's the job of the staff. And very simply, I tell board members, ask yourself this question: is what I'm proposing or the questions I'm asking fall under the job description of someone we pay to do this job? If they do, I'm probably micromanaging. I'm probably stepping outside of my role. So really, really important to stay in the what we want to accomplish and to stay in the assessment of if we're making progress toward that accomplishment, and not to dive into the how we're going to do it. It's important that staff articulate to you clearly how they're going to do it so that you have that knowledge and can explain that to the community, but it's not your job to determine the how. It's your job to stay in the what, the beginning phase, and the assessment phase at the end.
Okay.
Does that make it clear?
Yeah, for the most part. I think sometimes, especially in the last, I don't know, maybe month or 6 weeks, a lot of the long list of board questions in preparation for our agenda. I think that is part of where the confusion is. I think while the intent is to get history and understanding of a topic, the way that it presents is that there's lack of trust, and I want to see all the documents because I question, how this recommendation has been formulated. And so, from my perspective, when I read that to me is where that is delineated. It's between the staff work and the board work. I feel like for us, it's more the 30,000 foot level, what we want to accomplish. And then the ground level of how have we done that? But the middle part is really the staff work. And I am reticent to try to make the staff kind of come and deliver a long pile or list of documents to try to account for their decision making. And I feel like that's a little bit of what's happening.
And that's why I suggested, and I said it earlier in the presentation, I suggested that you think about before you ask for data, think about what's the question I'm trying to answer here. So is it, I don't know what the question may be. If before, Dr. Breggy, why did we hire 5 new teachers at the middle school? I don't know. Why did we? So think, instead of saying, I'd like a list of all the teachers we've hired in the last year and their credentials, think about what the question is that you want to have answered and go to the superintendent and see if he can help you work toward that answer or understand why that recommendation is coming forward. It's perfectly okay to want to understand why the staff is making a recommendation or why they've come to a conclusion. It's not okay to try to dig through data and find the answer when the answer might be just as simple as asking Dr. Breggy or sitting down with him and staff and having them walk you down the path that they took to make the recommendation. So that would be my suggestion.
One thing I'd like to say as a new board member, I apologize if any of my questions are on a micromanagement level. I find that I can't think openly unless I really know some of the very basic details. So I've bugged Dustin a little bit. Like I've said, I'm sorry to bother you, but when I look on the dashboard, it doesn't tell me exactly the enrollment numbers. Can I just ask you if it's not too much trouble? What is the, how many seniors are there? Stuff like that. And I suppose, that is a little bit.
No, Mandy, that's a perfect example of how to do it. Think about the question you want to have answered.
Right.
And get directed to the person who can answer the question for you.
Right. And the last thing I want to do is make more work for anyone. But sometimes, I really try to get it answered and I just can't quite, since I'm new to the board, I can't find the information and I can't make an intelligent decision about something until I, have a little bit more background. So.
Mandy, something that it's always guided me is that when an agenda item comes up, 99% of the time it's staff recommends we vote for this. It's in the transmittal, right? So they're saying to us, we recommend you vote for this. So you're entitled as a board member to say, well, I'm not so convinced, you need to back up why you want me to vote for that. And if it means asking some specific questions about that particular item. Now, if things have a history, for instance, planning and facilities will come stuff, this is the 5th addendum to this contract. And the transmittal will list what we paid on the other 4 addendums, but you want to dive deep into that to see the history of it. You're entitled to that because that's informing your vote. So I think, take what we're saying with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
We're not trying to misinform you or
no,
have, no. I would want you to have more knowledge than not when you're going to vote, because you have to remember every time you vote on an item that's an expenditure, which is most of our items, unless it's a board policy, you're spending taxpayer money, right? So we really have to cherish every time we vote to spend taxpayer money. So you need to be comfortable with your votes all times.
Yeah,
and I think, go ahead, Michael.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to give an example. Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
No, I was just going to say, I think Michael would rather the board be confident in their votes than have any insecurity about their vote. Because then what happens is things, you know, in the past, board members have brought votes back and undone them, and then it becomes a complete disaster. So we'd rather vet it out completely up front. And by all means, if you ever feel that you don't have enough information to take a vote, vote no on it. Request it to be tabled. You have parliamentary procedure on your side to handle things properly as a board member. So we try to do the best we can to get as knowledgeable, but when the agendas are deep and long, sometimes you don't get everything you want to take the vote. So
sometimes we can have a study session if we need to take a deeper dive into something that's going to be time consuming of not only the board, but the staff as well. I mean, we certainly will all benefit from having more information and a presentation from the interested parties and departments in regards to the decision making and recommendations.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be done in the format of questions and answers on the agenda. If that's the thing, then the proper procedural action needs to be taken.
That's a great point, Tristan. And always what you can also do as an individual board member is ask to meet with cabinet and get some history on something that you know might be coming up. You know. Yeah.
One example that was asked was, there was some question about professional development, and so when I was asked, I want to know every professional development opportunity and which teachers by name went to each, that's it was, and then it was not only that, then it was, I want to know in advance who's going to what profession. It was, I don't know how long that would take me to do that. When we allow principals to make that decision, do you know what I mean? It's like that could, you basically shut down then to get those types, get all of that type of information.
Right.
And what was the question you think they were trying to answer, Michael?
It was about a specific teacher that they didn't want to be attending some professional development, wanted to know which one that she was at.
And it would have been much easier to just ask you that question,
right?
Right? Okay.
Yep.
There we go. All right, what else? Anything else?
I think that's clear.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all for inviting me into your homes today. Hope I get to see you in person again sometime soon. I'm itching to go back down to
Michael is pointing to his home.
I hope you like my home.
That's his home. That's his home.
It's been your home for the last year, hasn't it been?
The only thing he doesn't have a bed.
Yeah, that's true.
He probably needs one too. Don't you?
Well,
a shower would be nice.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time tonight. I hope you feel like we accomplished some good stuff. And any other questions that come up, you all have my number, and you can feel free to call me anytime. You know I'm here for you.
Thank you, Dad. It's really informative.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Oops, on time.